Selamat pagi Bapak dan Ibu. Sebelum memulai acara, saya akan membacakan tata tertib selama berlangsungnya acara. 1. Pastikan perangkat elektronik Anda terisi daya dengan baik. 2. Gunakan earphone untuk kualitas suara yang lebih baik. 3. Gunakan atau pilih virtual background yang telah disediakan. 4. Mohon gunakan kolom chat dengan bijak dan baik. 5. Pastikan jaringan internet Anda stabil. Dan yang terakhir, selama acara berlangsung, peserta dimohon menghidupkan fitur kamera dan mematikan suara. Selanjutnya, saya akan membacakan protokol kesehatan yang berlaku. 1. Jaga jarak minimal 1,5 meter. 2. Selalu memakai masker. 3. Rajin cuci tangan. 4. Siap selalu dengan hand sanitizer. 5. Jaga kebugaran tubuh dan konsumsi vitamin secara teratur. 6. Hindari berbagi pemakaian benda pribadi. Dan yang terakhir, saling mengingatkan pentingnya protokol kesehatan. Terima kasih. Ladies and gentlemen, shortly the workshop will be begin. Please turn on the camera and kindly turn off the microphone. Thank you. The Honorable Dr. Iman Gunadi, Head of Research Center Bank Indonesia Institute, distinguished speakers and moderator, Professor Paresh Narayan from Monash University, Australia, Dr. Asep Suryahadi from the Semeru Research Institute, Dr. Arnita Rishanti from Bank Indonesia Institute, esteemed guest participants, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Shalom, Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya, and good morning to all of you. On behalf of the committee, with the warmest regards, we have the pleasure of welcoming you to BMEB Research Workshop. Participants, ladies and gentlemen, may we have the honor to call upon Head of Research Center Bank Indonesia Institute, Dr. Iman Gunadi, to give his opening remarks.
Distinguished guest speakers, Professor Paresh Narayan from Monash University and the Asia Pacific Applied Economic Association, Dr. Asep Suryahadi from Semeru Institute and visiting researchers at Bank Indonesia Institute, honorable guests from government institute, distinguished guests from partner institution, the academia, research institution, and participants of this workshop. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good morning. As you may have been aware that writing a paper, then publishing it in international journal is a challenging task for many researchers. Hard work and greater effort should be done by researchers so that their paper is accepted in the international reputable journals like Scopus Index journals. On the one hand, there are more and more papers produced by qualified researchers in the world. Those papers would certainly want to be published in prestigious journal. On the other hand, the space for publication in this journal is very limited. Thus, every researcher should be able to compete among themselves so that their paper may be accepted by the Scopus journals. This means that the quality of paper is the key to be able to compete in order to get published in an international or reputable journals. There are challenges we face when we are about to publish our research paper in international journal, and there is no easy way to do so. Having a clearly structured approach and understanding what is required is a good start. But beyond that, however, there are so many requirements to be addressed, and this will improve the changes to be accepted in a journal. It may begin with the necessity of new ideas, research area, and contribution, that it should have a sound of analysis and content in terms of theory and the quality of evidence. Lastly, the paper must have the novelty of the research. The purpose of BMEB Research Workshop that we are attending today is to develop a better understanding and qualified research. In particular, we will escalate the capacity of researchers to have international capacity in order to be able to publish in international journals. The workshop is conducted on a series of presentations from our speakers and followed by discussion session. Looking at the agenda of this workshop, I'm certain that it will be an opportunity for an excellent exchange of knowledge. BMEB continues to progress. In recent years, we have witnessed significant progress towards enhancing partnership, collaboration, as well as strengthening the research ecosystem. As we know, a good quality of research should be developed from time to time in order to keep up with the expansion of international standards. Therefore, we are here today to learn from each other to enrich and strengthen our research capacity. Ladies and gentlemen, we are very lucky today as we have two very qualified research persons present along with us to help become good researchers. Professor Pares Narayan will talk about the challenges of publishing paper in Scopus Journal, followed by Dr. Asep Suryahadi, who will provide a practical guide to being able to write and publish research manuscript. I hope this workshop will be an inspiring discussion for our research colleagues, and I wish you all a productive and successful workshop. Our team will make sure everything goes well. Thank you very much for your attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Bapak Iman, for opening the workshop. Participants, ladies and gentlemen, now we would like to invite you all to join virtual group photo. Group photos will be taken twice. Please turn on your camera and put your best smile. First photo in 3, 2, 1. The second photo in 3, 2, 1. Thank you. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we shall begin our main agenda today, BMEB Research Workshop. To lead this discussion is Dr. Arnita Rishanti, But before we invite her, we would like to introduce you to her. Dr. Arita Rishanti graduated from 10 November Institute of Technology Surabaya as an industrial engineer and awarded her master degree in trade and finance from City University in London. Her PhD is from the University of Liverpool in the UK, focusing on sustainable development and green economics. She started her career at Bank Indonesia in 2007 as an economist in the Department of Economy and Monetary Policy. She is now a researcher at Bank Indonesia Institute. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our moderator, Dr. Arnita Rishanti.
Thank you for your kind introduction, Bu Clarissa. Good morning to us all, and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First of all, thank you for having me here as the moderator. It is surely a pleasure for me. And also, I would like to congratulate Bank Indonesia Institute for having this fruitful event, contributing on efforts to strengthen research ecosystem towards a stronger, sustainable, and inclusive economic growth. For our research workshop today, we have two prominent speakers who have extensive experience in conducting research. Our distinguished speakers are Professor Pares Narayan from Monash University, Australia, and Dr. Asep Suryahadi from Semeru Institute. To Prof. Pares and Pak Asep, we thank you very much for your presence today. I hope you are well and healthy. Before we start our workshop, I would like to announce the housekeeping rules. For each speaker, you will have 25 to 30 minutes for the presentation consecutively and followed by Q&A for both speakers for around 15 minutes. To all participants, in the interest of time and to ensure all questions can be answered, may I ask you to use the chat box and I will ask your questions on your behalf afterwards. And please kindly mute your Zoom while the speaker is speaking to ensure the smooth running of this session. Next, please allow me to introduce our speakers. Professor Pares Kumar Narayan is a professor and consultant at Monash University, Australia. He is also a president at APAIA, Asia Pacific Applied Economics Association, and other prestigious positions. He holds the distinguished title of a high-site researcher, a title that was only given to 2 researchers in Australia. He was also named as top 90 researchers globally and top 40 researchers in Australia. His profound knowledge and experience in researching is proved by his H index of 85 and that his works have been cited for more than 26,000 times. For our second speaker, Dr. Asep Suryahadi is a former director of Semeru Research Institute and now is a senior research fellow at Semeru. And he is also a visiting researcher, a prestigious research position at Bank Indonesia Institute. He is a member of editorial board for Bulletin of Indonesian Economic Studies and also a member of advisory board at Indonesia Project of Australian National University. Lastly, he is also a mentor that I value highly. I would like to welcome Prof. Pares for our first speaker. Prof. Pares, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Gunadi, for your opening remarks and for alluding to all the participants about the value of research. I also wanted to, before I begin, thank Bank Indonesia and Bank Indonesia Institute for organizing this research workshop. They have been doing this for the last 3 years, and it's part of BI's program to enhance research in Indonesia. And I have been participating in this for the last 3 to 4 years. I think we all as researchers need to be grateful for the vision that the central bank has provided us, particularly for you Indonesian researchers who are trying to improve their chances of publishing in Scopus journals, SSCI journals. So I say this not lightly. I say this because I have been affiliated with many central banks, and I do not see this type of a vision to improve research at the grassroots level. So I think you people are very, very lucky. And this is not the only program that Bank Indonesia Institute offers local researchers. There are many other programs, including the BMEB conference, obviously, where we give you a chance to come and present. We set a certain number of spaces for local authors. There's also paper enhancement workshops that Bank Indonesia does. So there is a collection of programs for developing local research, and this workshop is part of that. And I just wanted to acknowledge and thank Dr. Gunadi, Dr. Solikin for the vision they have to improve your research. I will share my PPT. Right. Okay, so I believe all of you can see my screen now. Okay, so my talk today is focusing on the very same things that Dr. Gunadi alluded to in his opening remarks: the value of research, what you are doing, the uniqueness, what is new, the motivation, contribution. So these are the key aspects of publishing in good Scopus journals. And of course, when I say Scopus journals, I also mean BMEB. As you know, BMEB now is a Scopus Q2 journal. So a lot of the things that I'm going to say here today, you can go back and read some of the papers or any of the papers recently published in BMEB, and you will find guidelines on these issues. So what I want to start off with, and a lot of these things I'm going to talk to you in the next 20 to 25 minutes of my time, it is a reflection of my experience as an editor. And as many of you may know, I've been an editor for 15 years. So I started quite early editing journals. I was lucky in that way because not many people get the opportunities. It's always relative to opportunities. So I have edited, guest edited over 30 journals in the last 15 years. And the majority of the journals have been SSCI journals. All of them have been Scopus journals. So, and as you know, I've been managing editor of BMEB for the last 3 years. So I've got, I get to see at least 100 papers a month. So I've got a lot of experience in knowing where the paper stands, particularly from the point of view of getting a Scopus journal. So some of the things, or most of the things that I'm going to share with you today are not in any textbooks. These are simply coming out of experience of being an editor. So I think for that particular reason, this is this talk of mine is unique because it kind of reflects directly what editors go through when they look at your paper. The first thing is, what does a good paper consist of? And I think this is a very important question to begin with. Obviously, a paper starts with an abstract, and then it goes to introduction. So abstract is a small part of the paper, so I'm keeping that away for the moment because the majority of the papers tend to be rejected based on the quality of the introduction. So we should, ideally start talking about what is a good introduction then, right? Because if your introduction is good, the chances are that you are going to enjoy some success. And I'm not saying a good introduction leads to an acceptance of the paper. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that a good introduction keeps you in the game. And what is the game? The game is you submit your paper to a journal, the editor reads it, likes it, sends it to the reviewers, right? It does not guarantee that your paper would be accepted. What it does guarantee, in the worst case scenario, you're going to get a rejection, yes, but you're going to get at least one, or depending on the journal, 2 referee reports. And referee reports are like a free advice to you to improve your paper, right? So that's the goal. That's the channel through which we work with. So what is a good introduction? A good introduction should have a motivation, right? And what is motivation? Motivation basically means why you are doing this research. Okay, so explaining why you are doing this research, what is the new thing, and what is your hypothesis as a result of what you are doing. Okay, so motivation, hypothesis is absolutely key. If you cannot motivate your research, meaning if you cannot say why you are doing this research and why it is an important piece of research, you should not do that research because it won't go into good Scopus journals. The next thing is, how do these findings add to the literature? Okay, so what is the new thing that you are adding to the literature? Again, this is extremely important, right? What are you contributing? If some people have already done that research, then why are you doing it? Because as an editor, I'm not interested in what others have done. I want to know what is the new thing you are doing. So before you start any research, you should ask these questions, right? What is the new thing you are doing? What is new compared to the literature? Okay, so unless what it means is that in order for you to answer that question successfully and in a meaningful way, you need to first of all understand what the literature is all about. And this is where the problem is, that many of the researchers that I come across, and I have come across in the last 10 years, globally I mean, and more so in the Asia Pacific countries, I believe that the researchers are not reading enough in their area of research. Because unless you read, you won't be able to know what is the gap in the literature, and hence you will not be able to tell in a convincing way what is the new thing that you are doing in the paper, right? And this is the key thing. A lot of the papers get rejected, and many of you here who have got rejection letters would have seen referees writing that the marginal contribution of this paper is not sufficient enough, right? And that is very, very valid, because it is not enough. And I'll tell you later why it is not enough, when you may think that it is enough, okay? So when you talk about contributions, as you can see, my next point is to what literature. You need to be very, very specific, very, very particular that this is the literature, right? This is the weakness, this is the missing link. And by addressing that or filling that research gap, it is important for these reasons, okay? So it needs to be a very, very clear discussion of the gap in the literature, and how you are filling that gap and why filling that gap is important. Okay, so this is a very important part of the story that you write. Are your results robust? 99% of you would be working with data, right? So it's applied research, and an important part of applied research is to be able to say that your results are robust. Okay. So robustness plays a very, very big part, and many papers get rejected, i.e. because they don't have a robustness section in the paper. In other words, they don't talk about robustness at all. B, because the robustness test is not enough, or is not, it sounds artificial, right? So this is very important, that when you are designing your research question, when you are collecting your data, you need to, at the same time, before you have started doing anything else, same time think about what constitutes robustness. What are the things, what are the different tests you're going to do to say something about the robustness of your findings? The point is that if you cannot come up with a list of things that you are going to do to say something about robustness, you should not do the research, because that is not acceptable. Again, I'm talking from a good Scopus general point of view, like, for instance, I said about BMEB, right? These are some of the things we look at. Length of the introduction. So this varies depending on the journal. And some journals would want shorter introductions. Some journals would want a bit lengthier, but all these components are important. They still need to be there. Okay? How much you write, it depends on the journal, and obviously you need to go to that journal and read and understand. Okay, so components of an introduction. So this is some of the things that goes in the introduction now. More specifically, what is your research question? Is it new? Okay, if somebody has already looked at the same research question, why you are doing it? Then the journal is not interested in those type of things. Hypothesis, is it new? Okay, theory, what is the theory that motivates your hypothesis? So any research question that you build and you design needs to be supported by economic theory. If there's no theory, there's no research, right? Simple, very simple equation. Many of the papers tend to be rejected because there's no supporting theory. Econometrically, you pick in 5-6 variables and you run a regression model. Okay, there's no economic support for the regression models. Motivation, as I said earlier, why this research hypothesis test is important. Okay, and contributions, like we talked about, the contributions that you make to the literature. What do we know now from your research that we previously did not know? That is important. Can you answer that question or not? If you can't, don't do the research, because it will not go into a good journal. If it does not go into a good journal, it does not do anything to your profile as a researcher, right? You'd hear there's a lot of people with 20, 30 publications, but nobody reads them. The H index is close to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, right? Any H index that is less than 20 is not good enough in this modern higher education system, right? H index means how many people are reading your research and citing it. Okay, so that's why H index is widely used as a benchmark to know whether your research is of quality standards or not. So there's no point in publishing in journals where people are not reading and citing you, right? And you would know there are many people with 10, 20, 30 publications, but a H index very low. So anything less than 20 means it's same as 0, right? So that is the point. So you need to think about this in this way, that introduction is the most important thing. You need to spend a lot of time on writing the introduction, and we'll come back to the timing factor later. A lot of time does not mean you spend 1 year writing an introduction. No, I didn't mean that. But what I meant is that, you know, there needs to be serious effort, writing, rewriting, trying to perfect it, you know, benchmark it to some model papers that you follow, right? So these are important things, important components of the introduction. Now, in general, why are papers rejected? So, of course, I talked about introduction, but assuming you have ticked the boxes when it comes to introduction, you got a nice introduction, you have all those components that I talked about, why else do papers get rejected? And I think this is important as well, okay? Because as I said earlier, a good introduction does not guarantee you anything, okay? It can still be rejected. Good introduction is just a start, right? You can think of that as a foundation where you build a house, right? You need a very strong foundation, otherwise your house is going to collapse. So it's a very similar sort of thing. Your introduction needs to be written in a very, very convincing way. The way, say, movies are made, right? When you watch the movie, in the first 4 or 5 minutes of watching a movie, you will either like it or you dislike it in terms of interest, whether you want to continue watching it or you want to stop it, right? It's a very similar sort of feeling here when it comes to introduction. You capture the imagination of the editors and the reviewers. Okay. Now, why papers are rejected? Not well written. That's fairly straightforward. Like a lot of language issues. So your paragraphs are not flowing. You know, you say something here, then you jump to something else. So there's no flow of ideas. It's a very similar sort of thing with the movies, right? You're watching a movie, and if the scenes don't fit in a sequence, you will tend to criticize it, right? You will not like that particular movie. So imagine if a scene from the middle of the movie comes in the beginning, right? What does it do to your views and sentiment about that, right? You'll have a negative sentiment about it. That's what happens with editors and reviewers when they read your paper. If there's no flow of arguments, there are missing links, then of course they would lose interest in your work. They won't read it. And many times you would have seen from the reviewer reports you get, you will say, oh, I have said this on page 7, but the reviewer is saying I have not said it. And you are then saying, oh, the reviewer has not read my paper carefully. It's not the fault of the reviewer. It's the fault of you, because you have not presented your paper in a way that attracts the attention of the reader, right? What you have got on page 7 should have been on page 3. Okay, so this is the type of things that we are talking about here. Right? A weak literature review, meaning you are not aware of what other people have done in your area. Hence, there's problems in how you are trying to sell the contribution of your paper. No theory, as I said. Too much statistics. There's no economic story behind it. So you run regressions, report statistics, your regression results, but there's no discussion of what it means in economic terms. And as I said earlier, no robustness test. Even if your paper is perfect, language is fine, well written. If you don't have robustness test, 90% of the journals are going to reject it. Okay. Robustness test also means, can your results be reproduced? Right. So there is ethical aspect of your research there as well. All right. Okay. So having said all that, what are the things to keep in mind for your research? Some broad things for you to take away. What are the topical research areas in your field? You need to know this. Research question is extremely important, right? You need to do something which is topical, right? So why is that? Why do you need that as an editor? Well, as an editor, I want to publish something that is topical. Why? Because I want others to read and cite that paper. Okay, because as you know, impact factor of the journal is the responsibility of the editor. I want the impact of my journal to grow. My journal will only grow if the papers I publish in the journal are cited by you, right? If nobody is citing it, it's a useless paper, right? And my journal is not growing. So when I'm looking at papers, I'm looking at, is it topical? Who's going to cite this? If I publish this paper now, who's going to cite this paper? That's the question the editor asks. So sometimes, the very good papers get rejected. Why? Because they're not topical enough. From an editor point of view, I need to maximize the chances that your paper that I am publishing now will be cited by others. That's a decision. That's why I'm editor-in-chief, right? Or managing editor, because it's a decision for me to make. It's not a decision for you as author to make. It's a decision for me to make. And that's why sometimes you get rejection letters where you say, look, the reviewers said that this paper can be improved. The comments are not major. These are some things that you could have, solved in or revised your paper in 2-3 months, right? You would get the feeling, and then you'll say, still the editor has rejected it. The reason is because the editor does not find your paper attractive enough from a citation point of view. Okay. Speed of completion. This is very important. Like I said earlier, the speed is important. Why? Because there's immense competition out there, right? Whatever you are thinking of doing now, there's someone sitting in India or China or Turkey or Malaysia thinking about the same thing. So there's competition, there's global competition for papers. Journals are no longer short of papers. They receive a lot of papers, and they can only publish about 10% to 20% of what they receive. Right? This is very important. And again, this is another reason why some very good papers tend to get rejected, because we cannot publish them. Right? So this is very important, how quickly you do the research without compromising the quality. And last point is, paper needs to be well written. It needs to be free of errors. If you have got errors, it shows that you are a careless researcher. You are not professional about it. You don't take care of your paper. And in that case, the editors just make a decision that, this is not something, if the author is not going to take care of their paper, it's not our responsibility to do so either. And what it also means is that it reflects that you are a careless researcher, and therefore you are out of the game. Okay, so paper is well written, free of errors. Don't rush into submitting your paper once you have done it. You need to get it language edited. Yes, there's a cost factor in it, but that's a separate matter altogether. These are 3 key things that you need to keep in mind. I want to move to some parts of writing skills, which I think is important, and many of the researchers I come across don't do this. Read what you write. Read, multiple times. This is very important. Learn by reading and observing others. So you should look at the literature. You should know what your limitations are, and you should work on improving those parts of your research by reading. Right? So reading does not mean you open up a paper and you read everything from the first page to page 20. No, reading means you read only those things in which you are weak in, right? And you may be weak in writing the results of the paper. Some of you may be weak in writing the conclusion, right? Some of you may be weak in writing introductions. In fact, I haven't come across, many people who are good in writing introductions. Perhaps I've met only 5% of the people who are good in writing introductions, right? So it seems introduction is a problem that everybody faces, and therefore I have focused more on the introduction. You have to understand that writing improves with time. We are not born writers. And writing also improves with reading. The problem is that we as academics, 99% of us are not reading enough. Okay? Some of the other things you could do to improve your writing skills: carry your favorite articles when you are traveling. Yes, these days you are not traveling, but in general, when you are traveling, you should be carrying your favorite articles. And favorite articles basically means articles that you are very, very fond with, and you find a inspiration in them. By reading those articles, you've been inspired. It's easier for you to understand, and these are mostly top journal articles that kind of set the framework for your research. Borrow and learn by reading from non-related articles. Okay, so you might find something that's published in accounting journals, and you are working in economics or finance that would be related, okay, because of the overlap. Sometimes learning by reading there gives you a sense of innovation and some of the things that you can do to make your work different. Write and rewrite. I think this is again important part, that once you have written something, be prepared to delete and write again until it's perfect. Many people shy away from doing that because once they've written something, it's very difficult for them to delete and rewrite it. And encourage one of your colleagues to read your paper. Of course, it's a two-way thing. You need to read their research in order for you to get them to read yours. So it's important to have that kind of reading culture within writing group or reading group type setup. Okay, that is always useful because you often tend to get one or two of those comments that actually prompt you to rethink some of the things. And you must always be prepared to rethink, because this is really about your paper. Somebody gives you a feedback about your paper, it's a service, a free service that they do. So you should make every effort to actually embrace those comments and try to make your work better. Okay, results. So most important part of the paper, having ticked all the other boxes, is the results. And again, I talk about results because 99% of your research is based on data. So don't just describe the results that are in the table. You need to explain why you're getting the results you are getting. What do the numbers mean, right? What does 0.56 mean? What does a negative and a positive sign mean, right? How are the results consistent with theory? How do they relate to literature? Different. So there's a discussion about, this is your results and this is how it fits into the literature. And the negative sign means this, right? So you have to have a discussion about the results rather than simply saying that the effect of X on Y is negative and statistically significant. Okay, that's not good enough. You need to get deeper into this. Again, there's no textbook on this. So the way to learn is to read. If you read others, if you read good journals, and of course, again, if you read journals that are weak, you get into this culture of not learning. The knowledge you gain is basically limited to the low quality journals in which you publish, and you need to grow out of that. And that's why we're talking about better quality publications, right? Higher scopus journals, Q1, Q2 journals, that's what we are talking about. And these are the journals where you will find answers to these questions. If you go and read Q3, Q4 journals, you're not going to get answers to these questions, because in there's a culture of weakness. Right, and what we are trying to do through these workshops is to bring you out of the culture of weakness into a culture of quality research. Right, right. Okay, I've talked about that. What is good writing skills? Writing that is easy to understand. So, for instance, like I said, your favorite papers. It's your favorite because you are able to understand them. Okay? Many of the papers that we get, 80 to 90% we reject is. Out of that, half of the papers we can't understand what's the message. Ideas flowing from one paragraph to another often is missing. There needs to be a link between results, right? Explain your results with respect to your hypothesis. So if you have designed your hypothesis, you need to link your results to the hypothesis, that my results are consistent with this particular hypothesis, right? So that discussion again goes in the discussion of results. Your results again need to be linked to theory, okay? And then finally, you need to explain how your results are new or different the literature. So these are some of the common things that we often find are missing in the work. Okay, so I'm pretty much on time. I got another couple of minutes. Concluding remarks, and publication in Scopus journals is difficult. Okay, it was easier 10 years ago. Why was it easier? Because there was less competition for space. There was less number of researchers. Okay. Many journals in Scopus that were receiving 200 to 300 papers a year 10 years ago are now receiving 700, 800 papers a year, right? That's the market. As you look at other SSCI journals, the increase in the number of submissions is almost fourfold. And there were 10 years ago, they were receiving 400 papers, 200 papers. Now they're receiving about 1,000, 800 to 1,000 papers. So the space to publish remains the same. We can still publish about 20% of the papers at most. So what it means is that 80% of the papers we are getting now, we have to reject, no matter how good they are. Right? We have to filter it. We have to look at the topics and say, okay, I have a choice between A and B. Both are good. I'm going to choose A because it is more topical and it is going to generate more citations for my journal. Can you see? So B, nothing is wrong in B, but it still gets rejected because it's just out of the fashion, right? So it's very similar. Hard work is required in getting Scopus journals. It's not easy. Greater effort is required. More innovative thinking is required. And you should look for opportunities to collaborate with others as you go into different conferences, as you network, as you develop closer relationships with academics. You should be able to share some of your ideas, get feedback, and see if they're willing to collaborate with you, particularly if they are good researchers. Of course, 90% of the time you will fail just because these people are extremely busy, not that they don't want to work with you, but they have got a lot of their own research going. But there's no harm in trying because there's always that 10% chance that somebody will say, yes, would like your idea, but you need to take the lead role in doing that. You need to come up with the proposal, maybe come up with a draft. It needs to be sufficiently well, attractive for the researchers to actually join you in a research. So there is that possibility is always there, and you can be lucky. As I said, there's no cost in you doing that, but the initiative needs to come from you. So as you can see from in the discussions we have had in my talk, that there is clearly a stepwise process in getting to a Scopus journal. You need to tick all the boxes. It's hard work, but it is still something that is doable if you do the things right. So I'll stop there, and I'll be happy to take any particular questions. Obviously, this is a very, very wide open topic on which one can go on talking about, but I want to maybe leave it now there for you to digest it. And I'm sure all of you have some experience with journals and reviewers, and you may have some questions as well. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope that this has made sense to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Pares, for your resourceful presentation. Let's continue to our next speaker. I would like to welcome Dr. Asep Suryahadi. Pak Asep, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bu Santi. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. First of all, I would like to thank Pak Iman Gunadi and colleagues at Bank Indonesia Institute for having invited me to speak in this important research workshop. I'm actually quite sure that the participant in these workshops knows about what I'm going to talk here, and they have experience in writing and publishing articles in journal. So what I'm going to discuss here is just sharing my experience in writing and publishing a manuscript in a journal as a practical guide. Yeah. So let me share my screen. Okay. So we have heard from Pak Iman and also from Professor Narayan that writing in a journal is a very difficult undertaking. So I will start my talk with the motivation for us why we need to publish in journal. Then I will continue with my experience in writing an article for a journal, and also how we as a researcher should respond to referee's comment, and perhaps with some duplication with Professor Nayan's speech about the reasons of manuscript rejection and acceptance in the end. So let's start with the motivation. Whenever we get frustrated with the so frequent rejection that we have from journal, I think it's useful to remember this 4 points why we need to publish in journal. First of all, it is the highest form of academic publication above any other forms of publication. So if we are able to publish in a journal, we should be proud of it, because it is a confirmation about our academic credential. And secondly, through a blind referring system, it provides a benchmarks about the quality of one's academic writing. So we know if we get rejected so many times, then we know that our quality is not there yet. But if we get accepted, then we know that we have passed the threshold. Thirdly, it is a very effective form of disseminations, both for academic as well as policy audiences. In my experience, whenever I publish an article in a journal, I usually will receive queries brought from academics as well from policymakers asking about the article, or any aspect of it. And as I have mentioned earlier, it is a very important mark of our academic career. People in bureaucracy, their career is their positions in the bureaucracy. But for us academics, our career is our publication, especially publication in journal. So if we don't have publication, then we don't have career. So I think again it's useful to always remember about this point whenever we have difficulties in publishing in journal. So to have a paper published in a journal, of course we have to have an article first, and to do that we have to write it first. In my experience, it is quite useful when we write an article or a manuscript for a journal to start by preparing an outline. An outline is basically the structures of the paper. So it includes a number of major headings, subheadings, but not only that, it also should include the main ideas in each section. So, and we have to make sure that this outline contains all the essential elements of a manuscript. The introduction about the problem that we need to address, the literature review about the previous research on the topic, the method and data used in the study, the result of the analysis and their interpretation, and the conclusion to summarize the findings and also implication for policy and further research. So the titles of the subheading don't have to be exactly following this, but the elements should be there. We will see that in the example here, from one of my paper. I had a paper published a few years ago. The title was The Consequences of Child Market Work on the Growth of Human Capital. I apologize, this is too small, but you don't have to read it. I just want to show this is an example of an outline where I divided the paper or the structure of the paper is like this. The first section is the introduction, second section is data, The third section is child market work in Indonesia. This is basically the literature review. Then the fourth section is the estimation strategy. The fifth section is the effect of child market work on human capital, which is actually this is the result and the discussions, yeah, of the result. Then we do some heterogeneity test, based on gender, based on location, and based on the type of work. Then we end with a conclusion. So that's the structure of the paper. But we see that in each section we have already put all the main ideas. Yeah. In each section we have things that we will develop later in the paper. I'll go back to that later. But now I'm going back to the outline. Yeah. So after we have that outline, then we have to make sure that we have everything that we need to write efficiently. All the data, the references, the tables, the figure, etc., should be available, and then we put them, we consolidate them into the outline. So we put all these tables and figures into the outline. When we have completed that, then we start writing by developing the main ideas in each section, and we should continue to write without editing. Yeah. I'll give you an example from this outline. And the first section, we have 6 main ideas. So if we look here, the introduction, we have 6 main ideas. And the first main idea is that it says here, child labor is one of the most pressing problems in the developing country. So this main idea becomes the first sentence in the paragraph. Child labor is one of the most pressing problems in the developing countries. Then we add supporting statements, supporting sentences to this main idea. For example, the second sentence says, in 2012, the global number indicates that about 168 million children were in child labor, almost 11% of the total child population of the world, and continue like that. So that's how we develop the main ideas, and we continue with all the main ideas for the whole outline. Yeah. So we should do that without connecting from one paragraph to the other, from one section to the other. But once we have finished with all with developing all the paragraphs, then we should start connecting the parts to make a whole flowing manuscript. And we should revise and revise until the manuscript makes a consistent story. Yeah. It could how many times we revise? It depends. Yeah. Sometimes if I see the version in my drafts, it could go to 5 or 6 versions. Sometimes it could go more than 10 or 15 times revision, depending on the manuscript. So after we have finished with manuscript, yeah, then we have to complete it with an abstract. Yeah. So an abstract is basically a condensed version of the manuscript, which highlights the major point covered and concisely describes its content and scope. Yeah. As Professor Ryan mentions that an effective abstract will improve the chance of a manuscript being accepted and also encourage people to read it. Yeah. How to write the abstract? We should identify the main objectives, the data, the method, the main result, and the conclusion, and assemble all this information into a single paragraph. So depending on the journal, it can be just 100 words, or it could go up to 250 words. So we should check with the journal because I think each journal will have their own requirements and guidelines, including about the abstract. This is an example of the same paper, yeah, that I wrote with my colleagues. The abstract is here, yeah. So I'll give you the example, yeah. The first sentence here is the objective of the paper. This paper measures the effect of child market work on the long-term growth of human capital, focusing on the output of human capital production, mathematics skill, cognitive skill, pulmonary function, and educational attainment. That's the objective of our paper. Then in the second sentence, we continue with the data. Our full sample is drawn from a rich longitudinal data set, Indonesia Family Life Survey. So that's the data. Then in the third sentence, I explain about the method briefly. We address the endogeneity of child market work using provincial legislated minimum wage as the instrument. That's the method that we use in the paper. And the rest sentences, the last three sentences are the conclusion, of the findings of our study. First, our instrumental variable estimation show that child labor negatively affects mathematics skills and pulmonary function, but not cognitive skill and educational attainment. And continue. The next two paragraphs is also about the conclusion from the paper. This is just an example how we write an abstract. This paper was published in Word Development. So, for example, in Word Development, they don't call it abstract, but they call it summary. Before this paper was accepted by Word Development, it was rejected 3 times, by other good journals. So it's true. It's not easy to have a publication in a journal. And we see here that this paper was published in 2017. We first wrote the paper in 2010. So from the start of writing to the publication, it took about 7 years. It's quite a long time, and many things happened during those 7 years period, including new data coming in, like the IFLS 5 was coming in just in 2015, and we included it later into the paper. So once we have a complete manuscript, including the abstract, then before we submit it to a journal, we should do a checklist. I give you 7 checklists to complete here. The first one, the manuscript should say precisely what we want to say. It should follow a logical flow. I think Professor Narayan emphasized this about logical flow in a paper. It should be written in direct sentences with only one main idea per paragraph and 1 point per sentence. We have to make sure that it should be brief and concise, no missing essential elements. Remember about I mentioned about this essential element earlier. And the last 2 points, no repetition and internally consistent. This is especially very important if we write the paper with co-authors, with others. Because usually we divided, we split the task in writing. It could have repetition because written by different authors, and it could also be not consistent, because it's written by different authors. So in the end, somebody should do reading the whole manuscript and make them consistent internally, and there's no repetition. So if we have sure about that these checklists are met, then we can submit it to a suitable journal. And after a few months, I think usually less than 6 months, we will have a referee comment sending back to us, by the journal. If after more than 6 months we don't hear anything from the journal, I think we can write to them asking about what happened with our manuscript. So in reading the referee's comment, we need to read them carefully and calmly. Yeah. Please do not take the reviewer's comment personally. Some reviewers write very harsh comment. Yeah. So we should ignore about the harshness. Just try to find out and try to assess which comment can and cannot be adopted in revising the manuscripts. So we should then revise the manuscript accordingly, and this may require reanalysis of the data or do some more analysis of the data. So in if we get an invitation to revise and resubmit, in addition to the revised manuscript, we should also write a document responding to the referee's comment point by point. And please be polite in writing this document. So no matter how hurt our feeling was because of the comment, we should respond very politely. So once we have both the revised manuscript and the response to referee's comment ready, we can resubmit to the journal. Yeah. This is an example of a comment that we received for the paper that we use as example. I use example earlier. This is a comment from a referee, which is very important. I will read the comment. Yeah. A key threat to the interpretation strategy is that the exclusion restriction could be violated. While I do agree with the intuitions for using minimum wages as IV, the paper should provide some additional discussion or evidence why the exclusion restriction is realistic, as this is the key to the credibility of the result. The main problem is that minimum wages could be correlated with other province or district social policies or economic development that affects child human capital, even after control for the various district variables. This comment is written politely, thankfully, but this is very important. Yeah, and this goes to the heart of our paper, because if we fail to address this comment satisfactorily, it certainly will lead to another rejections of the paper, because we use IV in our method, and basically the referee questioning the validity of our IP. For you who are familiar with IV method, you know that a valid IV instrument, a valid instrument has to meet two conditions. One is relevant, relevance condition, which is straightforward to test. But the second condition, the exclusion restriction, which the referee mentions here, is basically an untested condition. So we respond to the referee by saying, we have added a discussion and evidence on the validity of our instrument on section 4, estimation strategy. We show that our instrument satisfies both relevant condition, table 2 in our paper, and to some extent exclusion restriction, table 3 in our paper. So this table 2 and table 3 are new tables. It's not in the first draft we submitted to the journal, so we do more analysis to respond to the referee's comments. Yeah. Thankfully, that the referee can accept our response, and the paper finally was accepted by the journal. So I think Professor Narayan has discussed about these reasons of manuscript rejections quite extensively. I don't have to repeat too much on this. I just want to point out that there are so many reasons for an article to be rejected by a journal. The first reasons here, poor research design, inadequate analysis, failure to conform to the targeted journal, and insufficient problem statement usually will lead to a desk rejection, meaning that the paper is directly rejected by the editor without sending it first to a referee. Yeah. Meanwhile, the other reasons here may become the reason for a referee to reject our article, yeah, such as the methods not described in detail, over interpretations of results, inappropriate or incomplete statistics, unsatisfactory or confusing presentations of data in tables and figures, conclusion not supported by data, incomplete, inaccurate, or outdated review of the literature, author unwilling to revise the manuscript to address reviewers' suggestions. Well, sometimes we cannot revise the manuscript following the reviewer's suggestion. In that case, we have to explain it clearly why that's the case. Yeah. Hopefully the editor and the referee can accept our argument, but sometimes they will not accept our argument. I have experienced both, yeah, in that cases. And finally, poor English grammar, style, and syntax. This could lead to both desk rejections and also referee rejection. So all these points should be avoided, yeah, in preparing a manuscript for a journal. But if we have a paper accepted by a journal, then we know that there are at least these three reasons why the journal accepts our manuscript. Yeah. First, about the contribution. Yeah, Professor Narayan emphasized this about the contribution and relevance to the field. Yeah. Secondly, is excellence of writing. And finally, the quality of the study design is also important. So if a paper is accepted by a journal, we know that at least one of these points is met. Yeah, it may be more than one, maybe two or all the three are met by a journal. So we should aim to have these 3 points in our one and every manuscript that we submit to a journal. I think that's all my sharing of experience in writing and publishing an article for a good journal. Yeah. Finally, to conclude, again, I agree that writing for a journal is a challenging but rewarding activity. So once the manuscript has been published, all the effort pay off. So thank you and happy writing.
Thank you very much, Pak Asep, for your valuable presentation. It is very timely that Professor Paresh and Pak Asep's presentation has given us a comprehensive, handy, and practical guide in writing and publishing in Scopus journals. From both presentations, we can draw insights of what a good paper consists of, what a good introduction section is, why papers are rejected, and general tips on writing skills. We can also grasp insights on how to respond to referees' comments and how to keep our motivation up and remember not to put things personally. It is also important to have the checklist checked for the final manuscript before the paper submission, and that the good writing is that it is easy to understand and the ideas flow from one paragraph to another. Always read what you write, and that writing improves with time and reading. So please read, read, and read. Having said that, let's move on to our Q&A session. We have so many questions already in the chat box, and if I may, I will go first to Professor Narayan. So I have 6 questions 6 themes of questions for Professor Narayan. The first one, so I will just read all the questions to you, and then you can later on respond, and then I will go to Pak Asep afterwards. The first question is about robustness check. Which robustness check best to use, and if you have any good reference for conducting this robustness check. And the second question is the difference, what to expect when we target to publish in Q1, Q3, in comparison with Q3 Scopus journals. What are the research gaps difference that we need to expect, and how to tell the quality of the journals even when they are at the same tier. So that is the second question. And then the third question is about the acceptance rate. Does it really true that panel data, papers that use panel data more get accepted than the time series data? And then if new researchers, if a paper is written by senior researchers, it's easier to get acceptance than papers that is written by the new researchers. I don't know, is that enough? I have 3 more questions. Do you want to respond first, Professor Narayan?
You can tell me all the questions, because if they're overlapping, I can cover in one response.
Okay. So the fourth question is about the best research method for conceptual paper. So what is the best research method for conceptual paper? And then the next one is, do we need to target Scopus journals? Does it need to have to be Scopus? Because we have other index like Web of Science and other index. And then the last one is, do we need to find the issue or the topic first before writing a paper, or we find the targeted journal first and then we elaborate on the issue? I think that's all. You can respond. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. These are all very common questions that researchers tend to ask. Let me start with the first one. I think robustness is very, very important, because now many of the good journals, including BMEB, I mean, we don't accept papers if they don't have robustness test. There are good papers we reject. Like you can even see in our conferences, you know, we received 200 papers. Out of that, there were a number of good papers which we rejected, just not because they were poor ideas, but just because they did not have anything to say about robustness. And we do spend, as the BMEB organizing committee, we do spend a significant amount of time reviewing these papers. We have an internal system where we do a very robust review by at least 2 people, amongst the BMEB team and Apaya team. So you see, we focus, one of the things we look at it, we also have a checklist, even for our conference. Forget about, you know, being Scopus or Web of Science. Even for conference, you can see out of 200 papers, we don't have time and space to accommodate 200 papers, even if they are all good. So we also have a list of factors that we consider in accepting conference papers, and we apply the same principles that we would do to Scopus journals. In this robustness test is part of it. And it has become a big part of the game now in the publishing world, because 10-15 years ago, robustness test itself became a paper on its own, just because, you know, there was limited research. So if somebody had done something for Malaysia, others in Indonesia or India would replicate that hypothesis test using Indian data or Indonesian data. Okay, that's no longer possible, like replication of that. It's now what used to be a paper on its own in a good SSCI journal 15 years ago, now is a section in a paper, which is what we call robustness. So many people ask me this, that what is robustness? And I'm spending a bit of time in explaining robustness, because you know, it's not something that is in the textbook. There's no textbooks on robustness. There's no guidelines on robustness. So this is a very genuine question. What exactly is robustness, and how do you figure it out in your research? So the way it goes is like this. The very first day you come up with an idea, research idea, right? So I'm taking you back on your day one, when you actually got an idea to do research on this particular theme. You must then go first of all to the literature and see whether that research question gives you enough scope to say that you are doing something new, right? Are you doing something new, or already people have worked on it? While you are researching that, you should then see what people have been using at robustness test on that subject. So it is robustness test that actually is dependent on your research theme. What is a robustness test for me doing financial market volatility is going to be very, very different for you if you are working on poverty and labor market. You see what I'm trying to say? So the point here is, who tells you, who guides you in terms of what is robustness? It's the literature. And the fact that many of you are not able to go to the literature, relevant literature, explains why you are not able to decide what is robustness. So this is where my sentiment about reading or lack of it is very, very relevant, that I believe that 95% of the researchers don't read enough. If you are not reading enough, you will never get to what is robustness. And if you don't get it right, the referee is going to either reject it or keep coming back to you and say, you need to do this, right? So you need to have a list from day one. So back to day one, when you are designing your research question, you must simultaneously design a list of things you're going to do as robustness. Question is, where does this list come from? It comes directly from the literature, because every robustness test that you are going to argue in your paper, you will say that Taylor 1999 has done this to show this. Therefore, one robustness test I'm going to do is this, following Taylor 1999, right? So the robustness test has to be linked to something that people have done in that literature. If you can build on that list, that's even better. So and this is where your cross-disciplinary research or reading comes handy. Somebody in accounting, doing similar sort of research on firms and companies and corporate social responsibility, for instance, would have done something differently, right? If you can take that as an idea and implement it in your work and make your robustness more and more solid and make it more shining out, it is going to add a lot of value to your work. Often, and is a good example of the research that we do here in Bank Indonesia Institute. We have published over 30 papers in Q1, Q2 journals. And there are some papers we're still working on, which have been there for like 2 years, where we are still revising it and focusing more on the robustness. So we're trying to develop new things, because there's no benchmark here. See, there's no theory, there's no limit. You can keep thinking, innovating, looking at different literatures. We had to, for instance, in one of the papers we have in a top Q1 journal, it's a top 3 journal. We have a robustness section which is actually bigger than the main results section, and we feel very proud about it because we are able to say that, look, regardless of what you do to your model, to your data, you almost always converge to the similar sort of findings. And we've done, in doing this, we continue doing that, and all of a sudden now we find that our robustness is like 8 pages long, whereas our main results is only 4 pages. So the thing is that there's no limit. What I'm trying to get to is it's about your thinking, about your reading. You borrow some ideas from here, or you borrow some ideas from political science, from regional studies or what have you. And there's no straightforward answer. I cannot tell you that this is your robustness test. No. Yes, unless you are working in my area of stock markets, financial markets, yes, I can tell you some things. But even that is just a guide. You can continue to innovate. And I think that's the beauty of this robustness test, that you can keep going deeper and deeper. So keep that in mind. I think the answers to that question comes from reading. The second one is equally important, Q1, Q3 expectations, the difference in quality. You would know the difference in quality, even if you pick out 2 Q2 journals, right? The difference in quality would be from the things that we talked about in today's workshop. You look at the introduction, can you follow it? Does the introduction have the hypothesis, contribution, motivation, robustness test, right? Theory. Does the introduction have these things flowing nicely? If it does, it's a better quality Q2 journal compared to the other, right? If everything is there, look at the size of the robustness test. Which of the papers have got a more solid robustness section? That's a better journal. Okay, so as editors, we look at these things. If you look at BMEB, you look at the BMEB papers, they tick all these boxes, right? They talk about these things. They talk about, we focus less so on the robustness because a lot of these papers we publish are on well-known themes where you don't necessarily need to do a lot of robustness. A lot of the robustness are kind of appendix based because, we want to go straight to the point. But what you will find, motivation, contribution, literature, these are all up to date. And as you move to other journals, yes, you will see the bigger sections on robustness. We don't spend too many pages on robustness because there's a reason why we don't do that as a Bank Indonesia journal, because monetary policy issues are quite common, right? So it really also depends on journal specific, the standing of the journal. As we become going towards Q1, we will be spending more space on robustness, right? So it's really, and that's where the editorial decisions need to be made, is how much you do what you are doing. The other thing is the acceptance rate between panel data and time series data. There's no biasness in terms of data. The thing that decides whether your paper gets accepted or not are the 5 things that we talked about: motivation, your new thing that you are doing, your contribution, why you are doing this, your robustness test. There's a theory, right? And you have basically written the paper well. The paper is free of errors. If you got all those things lined up well, then the chances of your paper getting accepted is high anyway, regardless of whether you use survey data, panel data, or time series data. Okay. Of course, the quality of that data then matters, because you can't then test a hypothesis on a survey data that includes 200 individuals from Jakarta. That sample is not good enough, right? It's not sufficient enough, representative enough. So yes, the quality of your data matters, but it comes later, and it's quite extreme that will be the case. In terms of senior versus junior researchers, I think it's not really senior versus junior by name. What it means is that senior researchers may be able to write a paper well with the experience they have. They may have tick all the boxes. Versus junior researchers who are almost always in a rush to get a paper published because they want to apply for promotions or what have they. So it's more a reflection of who ticks the boxes and ticks the boxes well. So I believe that the senior junior is more to do with the ticking of the boxes, that a senior researcher would be more well aware of the expectations, that you write the introduction, you cover all these areas, right? So that's the distinction. It's not necessarily somebody is younger. Okay? Best research methods for conceptual papers. Again, it really depends. If you're working in poverty, household income, and inequality and labor market, the methodologies are quite different compared to somebody working in financial markets, monetary policy, macroprudential policies. So what it means is that you need to first of all connect to your literature and let the literature guide you on what are the best methods. For instance, in financial markets, EGACH models and GACH models are very well used, right? Because of the high frequency data. When you look at your labor market, you look at your GDP, labor market, household, you don't use EGACH models, right? Because the data is quite different. So the methodology itself, the approaches that you embrace, implement, employ, depends on the subject of your research. You cannot generalize it, right? And the same thing goes with panel data and time series data. Okay, it really depends on a lot of the household income, labor market type, poverty type studies, including you saw in the keynote speech yesterday. Some of these are based on survey data, right? There's nothing to do with time series or panel data, just because of the nature of the research questions. Whereas if you talk about inflation, exchange rates, GDP, and you talk about macroeconomy, you talk about financial systems, you start to talk more about time series data, to a lesser extent panel data. Scopus journals versus Web of Science, again, they will be the consistency. If you select your journals in your field, those journals, the good journals, will be common to both platforms, right? So anyway, you have to connect with the top journals. There are 1,000 journals in business and economics, right? You need to shortlist it. You need to get to your top 10, maybe top 15. If you look at your top 15, the ones that you can target, it will be the same on both platforms. At least 80% of those journals would appear on both platforms. Then you have to look at, the point is, if you're going to publish a paper in this journal A, regardless of the platform, Scopus or Web of Science, is it going to get cited or not? That's the first question, because there's no point in publishing a paper if it's not going to get any citations. In 5 years' time, we will not talk about publications. We will only be talking about citations. It's already happening, right? In many of the developed countries, it's already happening. In China, it's already happening. People are not talking about the number of publications you have. And I think we need to be very, very clear on this, that in 5 years' time, when we have this workshop, it will not be about number of publications. It will be about number of citations. So you may just have that one paper, but 1,000 citations. I may have 30 papers and total 800 citations. You will be better off in the market in terms of your identity as a researcher. So that is important now, is when you choose a journal, forget about Scopus or Web of Science, any of this, who's going to cite it? So you want to target, the higher the journal, the better, because the chances of citations increase as you move to a higher quality journal publication, right? So instead of Q3, you move to Q1, the chances that your paper will be cited is higher, dramatically higher, right? By publishing in a Q1 journal. That is the thing. And so if you plan now to generate citations, this should be your thinking, because in 5 years' time, all your promotions, all your international identity, regional identity will not be based on number of publications. You cannot be saying that I have 50 publications, so I'm better than you. You may have 50 publications, but worse than me, who would have, say, 5 publications only, because my citations are higher than yours. So think about that. The game is changing quite dramatically. In fact, it may happen in 3 years' time. Topic first or target journal? So the last question there, topic first or target journal? The thing is that your topic should come first, because there's no point in looking at the target journal when you can't actually do research to meet the expectations of the journal, right? You have to play with your strengths, okay? So instead of going backwards, you need to go forwards. And that is to say, look, this is a research I want to do. What are the best journals to fit into that research, okay? Having found that, you then need to say whether you tick all those boxes. Your research question, how new it is. Can you list down 10 different robustness tests we can do? 10 is the number I'm making. It could be 5 in your area. It could be 3 in your area, depending on what you are researching on, right? So can you do a good set of robustness tests on that subject? If yes, then you proceed. If no, change the topic. Okay. The worst case scenario is that you spend 3 months working on something, collected the data, did all the hard work, did a lot of reading. After 3 months, you realize that there's no sufficient data for you to do robustness tests. That is a waste of 3 months, and 3 months is a long time in research. Long time in research. So the point is, on day one, you must decide there and then, before you actually start collecting data and getting deeper into the topic, whether you have got sufficient data to do robustness tests. If the answer is no, you don't have, then don't do the research, because nobody's going to cite that paper. Yes, you will be able to get published because there's 1,000 journals there. You can publish it somewhere, finally, right? But point is, nobody's going to cite that paper. Nobody's even going to read that paper. So think about that, right? You want to do something that you feel proud of. You only feel proud of when others read and cite your paper. Okay, and
yeah.
That's the message.
Okay, thank you very much, Prof. Pares. A very comprehensive response. So I would like to ask some questions to Dr. Asep, to Pak Asep. So we have 4 questions. The first one is that how can we decide which commons that we can or we cannot adopt it in revising the manuscript. So that is the first question. And then the second one is how to accomplish a good first paragraph, because at the first paragraph we need to convey all the problems, but it's difficult to accomplish that so that the reader can understand everything in the first paragraph. So that is the second question. And then the third one is how to convert a proceeding paper that already presented in a conference into a scientific, into a Scopus journal. So that is the third question. And the last one is if the time difference is quite far between the initial writing and the publication process, should we update our data and the model before we submit to a journal? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for all the questions. I think these are all good questions. Let me start with the first one. How we should select which comments from referees that we can accommodate and which one we cannot. Yeah, I think as a general rule, we should first try to accommodate all the referees' comments. Yeah, try to accommodate them all. Yeah, the one that we cannot accommodate is the one that we have tried and we cannot do it. Yeah. So only the one that really we have tried and we cannot do it, then we then explain to the referee that we cannot do this because of this reason, this reason. For example, as I have in another paper a comment from a referee, which basically asked me to update the data. And to update the data, I will need to purchase a database. And since I have no funding to buy the database, I explained to the referee that your comment is valid, and we agree with that. But unfortunately, I cannot accommodate it in this current paper because we have no funding to buy the database. Unfortunately, the referee and the comment cannot accept my argument, and they rejected the paper in the end. But it was accepted in another journal later. The second comment referring to the first paragraph, I don't really understand. Maybe it referring to the example of the paper that I use in the presentation. Yeah. So in that paper, I actually did not formulate the problem in the first paragraph. In the first paragraph, I introduced the context. So only in the second paragraph that I introduce the problem statement of my paper. And then I review the literature, and only in the sixth paragraph, I explain about my contribution, or our contribution to the topic. Yeah. So I think there is no iron rule about putting the problem statement should be in the first paragraph, because in this case, I put it in the second paragraph. About converting proceeding paper into a journal manuscript, I think it will be useful to follow the same step that we have described. Yeah, because before we writing an article for a journal, we usually already have a draft paper, or either for a working paper or for other purposes. But to convert that into a journal manuscript, in my experience, it is useful to follow the guideline that I have used in developing the manuscript. do I have answer all the question, Bu Santi?
Yeah, there is one other question, Pak, about the time difference between, what if the time difference between writing and the publication is quite far? Do we need to update the data? But I guess you already explained that
No.
in your...
Okay, yeah, I can answer that question. It's true that my paper was published quite long time from the original writing of the paper in 2010 into the publication in 2017. When we first wrote the paper, ILS5 was not available yet. It was only available in 2015. So yes, we updated the data when new data is available and we can use it. So we updated the data. Sometimes it's not only the data that we updated, even the theoretical framework can change. Yeah. I have one experience. My record with journal rejection is 8 times. Yeah. 8 times, and only in the 9th journal it was accepted. So when I compared my original draft with the one published in the journal, the difference is astonishing. Yeah, even the theoretical framework was different because of the referee's suggestions. Yeah. So, for example, in this paper, in the original draft, I used the program evaluation framework, but in the end, in the journal publication, it used permanent income hypothesis theory as the basis. Yeah. So anything can change, yeah, along the time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Pak Asep, and thank you, Prof. Pares. Actually, we still have some other questions, but due to time limiting, we need to end this valuable workshop session. It has been really, really interesting, and at least I hope all of you at least learned as much as I did today. Thank you very much for your presentation again, Prof. Pares and Pak Asep. Surely it will be beneficial for all of us in conducting research and encourage us to do more publications and contribute our knowledge to our society. Lastly, thank you very much to all of you, the wonderful participants, and see you next time. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I may return the floor to the MC.
Thank you, Ibu Shanti, for leading such a constructive discussion, and all speakers for sharing your valuable insights. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of our webinar. Please scan the QR code for the material of today's workshop. And I would like to remind all of you to fill up the attendance at the links provided on chat box. On behalf of the committee, we would like to thank you for your presence and active participations. Hopefully this event will be beneficial to everybody, and we wish to see you again in other precious opportunities. Good afternoon, and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.